good afternoon, everybody. We'll make a start. We may well have a few people joining us as we move through, but thanks for your time. Thanks for coming along to a Basis Wednesday webinar just before Christmas. Today, we're going to be looking at the results of the consultation, the Build Back Better consultation that we ran over the summer. My name is Russell Seymour. I'm the Chief Executive of Basis. I'll introduce and then I'll hand over to my colleague, Dom Goggins, our Director of Communications, and then I'll come back and talk a bit more. But today, a lot of this, we hope, is about you and your responses and your thoughts. We'd like to have a discussion with you about our proposals moving forward, how we take these results forward, and our plans for what we want to do next with the information that we've got. If you've got questions, certainly we would encourage you to ask them in person. Just unmute yourself and ask the question. Please keep yourself muted, though we all know the etiquette on Zoom meetings now. Please do keep yourself muted just to reduce background noise through most of it. But when you want to ask a question, please unmute yourself and come in. Alternatively, certainly feel free to use the chat for any comments. We'll review that once the webinar's finished. But if you've got questions, pop them into the chat or ask, or preferably raise a hand so we can see you. So if you go to the participants list, down the bottom there should be a raise hand, or possibly under more, there'll be a symbol to raise your hand. We'll bring you in to ask a question. For those of you that have been to our webinars before, you know that I often do a quick chat at the beginning, just rounding up a few things that happened in the last few weeks, week or so before the webinar. So I saw a statistic just yesterday. 100 million single-use face masks are being disposed of every week. It's more single-use plastic. It's something that is not reusable or recyclable. It's a shame that there are so many out there when a reusable, washable mask is certainly available to everybody. But 100 million single-use plastic face masks are being used every week. One shocking thing I saw this week, a paper in Nature, the preeminent science journal. Somebody has calculated that this year, coincidentally, considering it was published just this week, but this year, the amount of mass of man-made things, everything from buildings to cars to everything that you buy in the shops, the amount of stuff that we've made now exceeds all natural mass in the world. So human beings have made more things than nature has produced. And it's an incredible turning point. Just this morning, a coroner's court has allowed air pollution to appear on a death certificate for the first time. So very, very sad in a sense, but we've often had figures about air pollution and the deaths that it causes. And maybe this will raise awareness around one of those, certainly a sustainability and environmental issue. Since we last had a webinar, we've had the government's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. The energy white paper, Powering Our Net Zero Future, was just published this week. And we had the Climate Ambition Summit just on Saturday, where global leaders actually made more commitments to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions just a year before the Glasgow COP26 meeting. So the UK's ambition now is to reduce by 68% against the 1990 baseline. Europe has followed up with a 55% reduction, but most countries are increasing their ambition. But one thing that struck me this morning while I was watching on Sky News, they were talking to a couple who had set up a music venue during lockdown or during the COVID crisis. And it was their response to being locked down again. And one of the questions they were asked is that they wanted their venue to be carbon neutral. And they stated they wanted a carbon neutral venue. And the question to them was, doesn't this make it impossible now, just financially and all the other issues? And they said, in fact, it makes us even more determined. This whole issue with COVID makes us even more determined that our response to all these issues has to be green, has to be more sustainable. And we would like to encourage that amongst our members, certainly. So today's webinar, this is actually a first look at these results. We started this process back in the summer. It's around May or June time. So this has been open for about 6 months. It was slightly longer than we first intended, but it was never quite right. We always were engaging more people, or it wasn't quite right to land these results. We think it is now. We think there is Some optimism moving forward. Sports venues in certain areas under the tier system are allowed to open, albeit with a restricted number of people in the venue. So we think it's the right time to land this and move forward with the results that we've seen. So this is a first look for our members, for the respondents to the survey, and for other members of our BASIS community. So you guys are the first to see this, and we're keen to get your responses. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Dom, and he can tell you about the results.
Thanks, Russ, and hi everybody. As Russ said, I'm just going to run through the responses to the consultation and a little bit about what we think that's saying, that you as a sector are saying back to us. But just to add to what Russ was saying, actually, I think the one thing that you read for the past few weeks, there have been a lot of announcements the last few weeks. If there's one thing that I would encourage you to go and check out, it's the 6th carbon budget, which was published last Wednesday by the Committee on Climate Change. As you probably all know, we've got a kind of a growing relationship with the committee through Lord Deeben, its chair, and it's the closest thing to a blueprint for net zero that I've ever seen published, and it really is worth your time to go and have a look. It shows it's achievable, it shows it's affordable. It's very much kind of economic future for the UK, and if we get it right, a real leadership role for the UK in driving net zero around the world. And that kind of leadership, sector by sector leadership, one of the reasons why we started this consultation. I'm just going to share my screen. You all see that? I have no objections, so I'm assuming you can see it. Just to go back to the origins of it, I mean, it was kind of like, it was early on in the kind of the first lockdown, really, when we started to come up with the idea for it. I mean, there were calls across civil society and through business and kind of resounding in politics as well at the time around this concept to build back better. This was starting to take hold around the same time our kind of Wednesday webinar series started to take off in lockdown, and we heard it from you as well as a sector that this was something that was relevant to sport. We invited Lord Deeben, who's the chair of the Committee on Climate Change, to speak at one of the webinars, and it was the main theme of that webinar too. And ultimately, we kind of took the lead of his committee in their appeal to the Prime Minister in a letter that he published, a kind of official letter from the committee calling for a resilient recovery from COVID. So our analysis, and again, we heard it from you on these webinars, was that recovery, that resilient recovery, was relevant to sport. It was something that we needed to try and understand and to help the sector kind of get to grips with. But ultimately, if that was ever going to happen, it would need to be led by you, led by the sector. Because if a drive towards sustainability is going to be sustainable in the long run, then it's got to be a shared mission across the board. Hence the consultation, which we think is I mean, it's a first step, but we think it's certainly the most kind of comprehensive analysis of where sustainability in sport in the UK is and where it needs to go. So we asked 10 quite simple questions exploring 4 areas: overall sentiments around sustainability and in the context of COVID-19, exposure to climate change and the extent to which sustainability and climate is included in risk assessments, specific issues around sustainability, both things that people would like to work on and recognise as relevant, and activities that organisations across sport are already undertaking, and barriers, and how we can overcome those barriers or help to overcome those barriers. We have 82 responses, which we're really pleased with. It's a real cross-section actually of sport in the UK. We've got responses from the sports councils and leading governing bodies and a number of Premier League clubs and big iconic international venues, through down to kind of regional and grassroots clubs, associations and organisers, as well as kind of industry and providers, and service providers as well, and a few voices from kind of professional athletes as well. Kind of all in all, if you could cut sport in the UK down the middle and look at all of its various different layers, I think we feel that this consultation has a voice from each of those layers. So as a starting point for this drive towards sustainability, we kind of feel that it was a good one. So to run through those 4 areas and our analysis of the responses, section 1, kind of overall sentiment. So as you would expect, there was a clear support for putting sport on a more sustainable footing, with the overwhelming majority of organisations responding to the consultation saying that they both support the need to become more sustainable and saying that they're already undertaking some form of sustainability activities and they're already on that journey. But I think the most telling thing was unanimous support for the idea that COVID, as well as being a major crisis that we've all been kind of plunged into, needs to be a turning point. And these are a small selection of quotes from the in response to that question. But the sentiment that ran throughout all of the different quotes were the same. Support for this idea was unanimous. As you see from the top down, a clear opportunity to change current practices rather than to return to previous bad practice. Sustainability is the key to success of our sport and our resilience. Only way to operate and have any credibility. Such a large platform, we can reach so many people, an opportunity for us to educate and influence others. Recognition that normal will look different when all of this when we move past all of the the immediacy of the crisis that we're in, and a sense that we've got a responsibility as individuals and as organisations, particularly in a sector with a platform that's this powerful. So overall sentiment very much in support of the idea that sustainability is an important thing that we need to operationalise. Section 2 around exposure to climate change and the extent to which climate change and sustainability are covered in risk assessment. Over 70% reporting that they're already feeling the impacts of climate change. It's a reality for many organisations in sport right now. Our report, Hit for 6, which was around the impact of climate change on cricket, I think was a fairly detailed analysis of that, and we've been involved in other pieces of work, as have some of our partners like the Rapid Transition Alliance, showing that climate change is a very real problem for sports now, and that those trends will only increase and become more extreme as we move through this decade and beyond. But I think most telling was, and it's maybe a bit of a difficult kind of truth that's been unearthed here, is that for a third of organisations in our sector, sustainability and climate change aren't included in the kind of organisational risk assessment. It might be a technical point, but actually some of that might be explained by the operational reality of the organisation that has responded. But a third is a very high number to have no coverage of sustainability issues or climate risk or climate exposure in the risk assessment. I think we need to change the balance on that, and actually that's given us as basis some food for thought in how we can help the sector to do that. Moving on to section 3, I'll ask Russ actually at this point or at the end of this section, I'll ask Russ if he's got any kind of ongoing reflections as we move through, because Russ has been obviously involved in analysis of these responses too, just in case there are things that I'm missing. In relation to the sustainability issues that are relevant to organisations that responded to the survey, quite strong answers here across the board. You can see that the options ranged from kind of core operational issues like energy and waste and water through to kind of broader societal questions around health and well-being, engagement and education. And only 2 sections came in under 50% in terms of relevance, and they were materials and chemicals and biodiversity and habitats. And again, I think some of that can be explained by the kind of operational reality of some of the organisations that responded. But I think the thing that I mean, there's headroom in all of these areas for sure, but our big takeaway when we were looking at these responses was that I think there is a real understanding in our sector that sustainability goes beyond core operations to something a little bit more kind of existential, or something which kind of speaks to the heart of the identity of sport in the UK, which is something that is relevant to the local community, that is really relevant to people's lives, that does bring a kind of broader opportunity to improve health and well-being, and to really engage people in a bigger mission. And I think that was something we were really encouraged by. That being said, when looking at the issues that organisations report are ready to be engaged in, there is a significant amount of headroom, I think, across the board here, and it was telling again that communication came out on top. I mean, communication is really important, and if that communication is with kind of commercial partners and about making sure that those contractual arrangements that organisations have are on a sustainable footing, then that's really positive. But in things like using renewable energy, for that to come in less than 50%, there is a lot of work that we can do there. And I think there's work that we can do quite quickly to change that dynamic and to push all of these different columns up. That's not to, you know, it's not to lessen any of the work that is being done or any of the commitments that organisations have got. I think it's just something we have to look at, you know, with quite a hard-headed analysis that we can do better as a sector in a lot of these areas. And while communication came out on top, one of the other areas that we explored was around internal communications and discussions. So in which area of your organisation are the dominant kind of sustainability discussions? And I think less than 10% around where it's not formally discussed. You know, that's quite a low percentage. Hopefully that can become zero very quickly. It certainly can. But I think what we realise by looking at this graph and looking at the responses to the consultation is that the two columns on the left around board level and senior management, we need to push up as high as we can, because really, if we're talking about getting to the point where sustainability is at the heart of an organisation's approach and strategy and commercial decisions, then ultimately that's where, you know, if that's where those decisions are made, then we need to make sure that sustainability conversations are flowing through board discussions and senior management discussions, as well as operational discussions. Russ, anything to add at this point before I just get onto barriers?
I think you summed up fairly well. I mean, I think the 12 points, some of you would recognise that the 12 points on sort of 2-3 slides ago were the 12 that we use in the basis certification scheme and our structure. That's why we use those titles. And it's interesting that sport has always done very well, or certainly in recent years, sport has done very well in advancing social issues. So I think that was reflected in there. And then in terms of environmental issues, the relatively, should we say, popular issues around waste and energy were clearly in there. As you mentioned, all of them have a decent amount of headroom, and we can improve on all of them. But for us, it's really important, and we've now got a clear baseline as to what people are doing and how they're doing it.
Thanks, Ross. And obviously, to everybody, we can dig into all of this stuff in a bit more detail after we've run through the summary. Onto the final section, which is about barriers, identifying them and ways that we can overcome them. And this obviously is the core task of this consultation, because if we're going to take it forward, then we need to work out how we as an organisation and we as a sector can overcome these barriers as quickly and as easily as possible. You've had this slide up for a while, you can see what it says. Other, I will just say, is some of the detail came out in the long form answers that I'll come on to in a second. But actually, other, I think, in large part reflects the first two columns, and actually the barriers, I think, fall in broadly into two categories. Certainly that's what we're hearing from the responses that we received. The first is around kind of big external drivers around policy and funding. So is the cash there to enable organisations to make these big shifts? Is there a consistent kind of enabling policy framework, either within sport or in national legislation, to to persuade and allow sport to make that shift. I think what we're hearing is no, certainly not on a consistent basis. And then secondly, in terms of big internal drivers or a big internal gap around knowledge and skills and expertise. There is some really good knowledge and expertise in organisations across sport, but there also is a reality where people have sustainability in their job description when they might have expertise in comms or in something else, or in corporate social responsibility without any specific knowledge around environmental sustainability. All of this is borne out by the kind of long form answers. So into those two kind of broad categories, funding was a really strong area of the responses here. Unfortunately, it all comes down to money. Like, I think our recognition is that, you know, from particularly irrespective of COVID, to be honest with you, it was always going to be difficult for every organisation in sport to find the funding to, you know, to start to initiate these shifts without any external support. And I think that obviously becomes that's put into much sharper focus by the economic impacts of lockdown and continued pressure on the financial model of sport because of COVID. It was a resounding kind of section of responses around funding. It's something we really recognise, and I'll come on to remedies in a second. The other was about kind of knowledge, like I've said, and it wasn't just, you know, something that came through wasn't that organisations are looking for they recognise that they need to have a sustainability expert in-house. It's about how they can access that knowledge. So making sure that the opportunity to network with other organisations that are doing sustainability work and that, you know, that you can learn from, that those opportunities are there, that we as an organisation are providing the kind of guidance and expertise that we have in-house to you as a series of sports and as a network. And just the kind of general sense that we as a whole sports sector are on the same team when it comes to environmental sustainability. And I think that the takeaway for us from all of this, particularly the barriers section, was that we as an organisation, as Basis, have got a job to do, a big job to do, and it's something I think we see our role in helping to drive this forward. And if you take these two sections of barriers as an example, some of that is about advocacy, and some of it's about us as an organisation, as a collective voice, making the point to the powers that be in sport and the powers that be in kind of national government and politics, that people need a consistent enabling policy framework and they need some funding. And if those two things are provided, then we can make a lot of progress quite quickly. And then that we, as an organisation that can provide services to the sector, have an opportunity to work in a way that upskills the sector and that provides the connections that you need to enable sustainability to become a real priority and a real area of progress in your organisation. And I think this consultation and our response to it, which Russ will go into the recommendations that we are proposing in a little bit of detail now, but this consultation fires the starting gun on that project. And I think it's something that we absolutely take forward as our priority into the new year, and we're looking to kind of generate some momentum early in the new year, and then use our conference, which will take place online in the spring, as a kind of big moment of declaration and a big moment to generate some real momentum around this area. But more of that in a little bit, and for now I'll stop sharing my screen and hand over to Russ.
Excellent. Thanks, Tom, for presenting the results. We'll get a chance to ask some questions shortly. I'm just going to give you the approach in terms of our response and where we think we ought to be going. So I'm hoping you've got my screen up now. So that is effectively a starting point. It's a lot of work went into it, but it's a starting point, and we've got to move on from now. So we think we've got a clear direction on this. UK sport is recognised as a world leader in all sorts of areas, in terms of performance, in terms of coaching, etc. And our sector really should be a world leader in sustainability performance and our response to these sustainability issues. And that does reflect the BASIS mission, which is to empower sport in the UK to be world leading in sustainability. The results clearly show we've got an opportunity. The opportunity came out in the long questions that people answered, but we've got the desire and the will to do something about this. But we recognise that the sports sector needs to be given more to be able to do more. So there needs to be more information. There needs to be clearer guidance, but also there does need to be financial support potentially, but definitely policy clarity, etc. So if that is actually given, then it's also clear that there's a feeling that there's a responsibility to do something about this. So we're really positive that the sports sector is actually ready to take on some of the challenges around sustainability. From a BASIS perspective, the way we see our role is that we can provide a common framework and a coordinated response. And this was requested by quite a few people in their responses. They say that it shouldn't be that certain sports or individual venues take this on board. There should be some kind of coordinated response around this. And we think that BASIS is in a position to do that. We've got a simplified format that some of you would have seen in our previous webinars, that it can be confusing to talk about 17 sustainable development goals and 169 targets, which a lot of industries are doing. It can even be confusing to talk about 3 pillars of sustainability and how does the environment link to the economic and how does that link to the social. So we've simplified and we're going with a One Health type approach around personal health, around community health and around planetary health. And those 3, around that one theme of health, they build upon each other and the scope increases. So we want to create opportunities for the sports sector by raising awareness of the issues and suggesting actions. We want to drive ambition within the sector and actually push us to do a lot better around sustainability issues. More advocacy to policymakers and certainly more advocacy up to government to get clear guidance from them. And then we can finish all this off with monitoring and actually reporting on the results. Are we actually making a difference? So in terms of the action plan, Dom touched on some of this, but this is our timeline at the moment, and it is an ambitious timeline, but we want to push for this. So we're looking to publish the results in the coming weeks. We're hopefully going to put this out to the media between Christmas and New Year. In Q1 of 2021, we're looking to hold meetings and workshops. You guys will be invited as respondents and part of our community, where we really want to refine the proposals, what we're taking from this. We want to discuss how we actually deliver on some of these proposals and then actually build momentum in support of these proposals. This will have to include advocacy to government and to policymakers so we can get some clear policies by the end of the quarter. And then the plan is to hold an online summit. I'm sure most events are still going to be online 3-4 months hence. So our plan is an online summit in spring 2021 to actually deliver our final plan. So these are our very broad brush. We want you to respond to these and comment on these and give us some feedback. But we've discussed internally, is there actually any value in some kind of declaration? Is there a value in sport declaring a climate emergency? This is something that was advocated at the weekend by the UN Secretary General to world leaders. He encouraged every country to declare a climate emergency. Many local councils in the UK have done so. The UK Parliament has done so. I think was probably one of the first in the world. And certain sectors have. The music sector a few months ago, possibly even up to a year or so ago, declared a climate emergency. But there's a chance that they could just be empty words. Many councils are now finding that their policies aren't backing up on this climate emergency declaration. So possibly they could be empty words, but it could be powerful if there's support for it. How do we set targets and commitments around this? Should there be some kind of charter that people can sign up to with definite targets and definite plans in there? We think that we should be setting some kind of performance goals that people can meet. But ideally, we want to show ambition. So sport should be meeting these targets in advance of legislated deadlines. So just examples, can sport, however we define that scope, but can sport be net zero by, for example, 2040, beating the government requirement of 2050? Or can we move to electric vehicle fleets within our venues, within our teams, etc., before the 2030 sales ban happens and we shift over to electric vehicles? We should be setting minimum sustainability performance requirements, but how do we actually do that? We could be setting conditions in grant funding. Any organisation, whether it's grassroots, anybody who gets funding from any kind of awarding body, can there be conditions set on that grant funding that there needs to be some kind of response to sustainability issues within it? The Arts Council's already done this for museums and theatres and rewards in the arts sector. So can we do that in the sports sector? Can sustainability be inserted into licensing requirements? So from local government actually licensing venues to operate? Or can it be in conditions from leagues and as to how the venues within the leagues operate? That already happens on certain other things. So why shouldn't it happen on sustainability? And then can we also put in these sustainability requirements on national and international competitions, particularly if they're high profile? So we can actually be demonstrating that UK sports sector is leading on these sustainability issues if we have a world championships that's taking place in the UK, for example. We noted that there's a good section of sports organisations that are not including sustainability issues in risk analysis. So we'd be advocating sport-specific analysis by governing bodies. How is your sport in particular going to be impacted? And then venue analyses as well. You know, we'd encourage individual venues to do this, and it's something that BASIS could assist with. And finally, I think it's our fifth or sixth point, awareness raising and training around the sports sector. So whether it's to administrators, managers, execs, to players and participants, or to fans, actually raise the awareness of sustainability issues and how they're going to impact the sports sector. So that's a summary of the points, sort of the subheadings that we're looking at in terms of our response. Is there value in a declaration? How do we set the targets and commitments? How do we input minimum performance requirements? Should it be through funding mechanisms? Should it be through licensing? Should there be requirements on major events? Putting in risk analysis. Can we do a sport-specific risk analysis or for venues or different events? And then how do we implement awareness raising and training within the sports sector? So that's our approach. I'll leave that slide up just briefly to initiate our conversation and our questions. So I would encourage anybody who now has any questions to come in. I think Chris Tricky from SAPCA, were you ready with a comment for us? And then I'll hand back to Dom. Chris, over to you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, Russ. Yeah, just a little bit of introduction from me to who I work for and the relationship we're developing with BASIS. So thanks very much for both the presentation so far and the opportunity to participate. For those who don't know me, yeah, my name is Chris Tricky. I work for an organisation called SAPCA. The long name is the Sports and Play Construction Association, which is why you can see we shorten it to SAPCA. And in essence, what we are is a trade body for the sports and play facility construction industry in the UK. We've been going about 25 years, coming up towards, and we're a non-profit seeking body, and we're basically membership driven. Now, we've sort of evolved over the years to become something of an umbrella organisation for the sort of sports facility construction industry. And in many ways, we've got sort of one foot in the sports industry and one foot in the construction industry. So members who keep us going by paying membership fees are specialists, contractors, manufacturers, suppliers, consultants, all within a specialist knowledge in design, construction, maintenance of sports, play, physical activity facilities. But in the way that we sort of broadened, that we have lots of affiliate members who are funding bodies, sports governing bodies and others, and we're delighted to have this new partnership with BASIS, who are probably our newest affiliate member. One of the things that we're really there to do is very much to serve our industry, but to really work closely with the wider sort of venue marketplace for all of those who are developing facilities. And we see part of our sort of role in life is to be providing a lot of useful guidance and information, sharing best practice. One of our sort of catchphrases to help them make better choices. So anybody who's developing a facility, and lots of people are who aren't necessarily people with all the technical knowledge, and why should they have it? It's about us giving them the knowledge and sharing the best practice so that the choices they make in developing facilities are the ones that give them best value for money, but give them the quality and performance and durability facilities that they're looking for. So that's kind of who we are. The relationship that we're just entering into, which I think is a very exciting one with Basis, then very much environmental considerations and issues and challenges are very much the order of the day for our industry, where there's a lot of work that's already sort of started, and we're delighted to be able to work with Basis going forward, not least drawing on the fantastic expertise that the likes of Chris and Russ and others have got. But as we really meet those challenges as our sector of the industry, both to try to make sure that as an industry we're as environmentally friendly and as green as we can be, but also I think there's a very big opportunity. Obviously our members have a very wide reach into the sports marketplace, so lots of the things that are on your slide and things you're discussing are things we'd very much like to join in with in supporting the work that's going to go forward, and whether it's actually adding to it from a technical point of view in terms of facility design and recycling and so on, but actually just using the various comms challenges that channels that we've got and the relationships we've got with sports bodies and others, then hopefully we can the total can be more than the sum of the parts. So Russ, I hope that's enough as a bit of an introduction. Happy to join in the conversation and answer any other specific questions, but hopefully that sets the scene a little bit for where, very much at the early stages, that the whole relationship between Basis and SAPCA might go in the future.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for that. I'm going to take over this bit from Russ. We've got about 20 minutes just to get into some of the details here. If you would like to say something, make a contribution, ask a question, please there's a raise hand function, or you can indicate that you want to talk in the chat as well. I think in terms of the purpose of the Q&A bit of this, like obviously we've done the analysis on the consultation as we see it. We'd love to hear what you think of that, but at the same time, we've not quite finalised the final document yet. So what you say here will form part of that final analysis and influence that final document. So we're still very much in listening mode. And I'm going to come to the raised hands in a second, but I just want to flag a comment from Richard in the chat talking about action into words in the context, words into action in the context of climate emergency declarations. And I think it's a very valid point. We've got a situation where over 300 local authorities in the UK have made a climate emergency declaration, but it's not a material consideration in any decision making. So a local authority that's declared a climate emergency is still capable of making high carbon decisions. And I think it would be really interested to hear whether people think that a climate emergency declaration is the right thing for sport, or if we need something a little bit more tangible in terms of target setting. I think that's a big area where we'd love to hear more. But Raf Nicholson, if you want to unmute yourself and feel free to show yourself as well on video, over to you.
Thanks, Dom. Thanks, Russ. Hope you can hear me okay. Really interesting to hear the results of the white paper coming in. I was particularly interested in this idea about the sector setting kind of minimum sustainability performance requirements, and also potentially setting conditions on grant funding. It reminded me of the stuff that UK Sport and Sport England have done in terms of gender quotas, and actually that being it being a requirement that if you're going to get government money, then you have to have a certain amount of women represented on your board. Do you have any sense of how amenable Sport England and UK Sport are likely to be to that kind of proposition, in terms of that actually being something that they would set centrally and work with national governing bodies of sport to work towards? Good
question, Russ. I'm going to bring you in a second. I think my only comment on that would be that's part of the task for the first part of next year. But if you know, in sport, where does the influence lie? It lies, it's tied to money, basically. And I think the big kind of contractual, like the strategic decisions around the funding cycles for the sports councils are going to be made, I think, in the early part of next year. That's certainly my sense. With an Olympic Games coming up and a need to kind of, you know, go into a new round of 4-year funding cycles after the Games is finished, I think the strategic direction for those funding settlements is going to be set before the Games. And I think we've got a big task to make sure that sustainability is built into the strategic direction for funding around, certainly exchequer and lottery funding around sport in the UK in a really meaningful way. And I think where sports have got more of a commercial footing, like Premier League, for example, there are examples of Premier League clubs doing really great stuff, but there's no collective effort at this stage. And I think that's the other task that we've got for those highly professionalized sports with, you know, a decent amount of resource to play with. Like, how is that resource deployed? So I'm not sure of the level. I know that UK Sport are talking about this, and it's both Sport England and UK Sport responded to the consultation, and, you know, I've been, I think, open for positive engagement. But we as an organisation have got a job to do, I think, to help to crystallise what they really mean when they're talking about sustainability, either in national governing bodies or at grassroots level. I will ask Russ to respond, but I might put Chris Whitaker on the spot as well to talk about his experience as somebody responsible for grassroots delivery in a funded sport. But Russ, you first, and then Chris, and then over to more raised hands if there are points to raise.
No, Dom, I think you kind of summarised it pretty well. I'll be completely honest, at the moment, we've not engaged with these suggestions to the policy authorities, to Sport England, all the regional sports bodies and UK Sport. They have been talking about these issues. They have been talking about sustainability. Whether or not it's developed far enough that we can implement this in the short term, we need to find out. But that advocacy period that we've got, look, it's a challenging period because there'll be all sorts of other priorities coming up. But in Q1 next year, we really do want to initiate these conversations. And then to exactly answer your question, Raf, is there a willingness to do this? Is the political momentum as well? You know, there's a huge amount of political momentum starting behind this. How will that influence sport? Or will the COVID overhang, you know, COVID's still going to be around for months to come. Is this really the opportunity to start implementing these changes, make, you know, almost a silver lining in amongst all the tragedy and the problems that we've had? Is this now an opportunity to restructure things and actually start to make changes? And is the will there actually to do it? So the brief answer is no, but we really want to investigate this and see where we can take it to. And I think over to Chris.
Thanks, Russ. Well, actually, it's quite the opposite because I've, and Russ isn't aware of this yet, but I've just set up a meeting with Sport England for next week. But that's with their technical people rather than the kind of upper echelons, and they'll follow. But yeah, having spent 12 years working in recreational sport and the kind of funding facilities side of things, it has been difficult to kind of get the policy side of this sorted out in terms of how you attach conditions to funding. And for a number of reasons, and good reasons, that hasn't been possible yet. But I think once the will from government is made quite clear, that will happen. And Russ and I have been in discussions with other funders who are keen to start introducing some kind of sustainable slant to the way that they shape their funding. So I think that's probably more going to go down the route of encouraging people who apply for funding to consider, you know, sustainable design, and then help to fund the kind of design side of things first. I noticed Chris Tricky just mentioned about the Football Foundation, and absolutely, we were speaking to them yesterday, and they certainly are totally committed to ensuring that whatever they do out there is going to be based on sustainable principles, and they've just set up a framework which will include, contractors having to meet not just minimum but fairly high bar when it comes to sustainable practices.
Thanks, Chris. We've got about just under 15 minutes left. I would encourage anybody to put hands up and to make a contribution. Otherwise, I'm going to start putting people on the spot. And I'm looking at Pete Watts' picture because I've got a couple of questions for Pete in this context. So I might be coming to you in a second. But I think, this whole process has been, the whole point is it's led by the sector. And I think we've had some really useful and really detailed responses. I think the door is still open for the next couple of weeks to share your thoughts with us, even if it's following up, having reflected on this by email, and we'll send out the presentations. But Pete, the reason why I'm interested in coming to you is, given your work and how like your experience of helping venues and partnering with venues as they start to think about what unlocking looks like. I'm just wondering if you've got any reflections on, the thing that we heard at the start of the consultation, that people do see COVID as a turning point, and they see it as maybe opportunity is the wrong word, but as the moment where we do reassess the way that we do things. In helping those venues think through how they unlock and get their operations underway, have you kind of noticed that sentiment becoming a reality?
Yeah, I think there's people are all kind of at different stages. I mean, there's still very much some organisations which are going through a fairly difficult time from an HR point of view with redundancies and all of those kind of things, which take precedent. But the thinking as we come out, and it is slightly annoying in the UK at the moment, it's very stop-start, which is frustrating all operators, as in there seems to be a pathway and then the door gets slammed shut and we kind of go back a stage and then go forward. But hopefully going forward from next year, things will start to unroll. There is a general appetite that the people are aware that they need to do things differently in all kinds of different ways, partly because of the changes in operational personnel. Some of the experiences left places. There's a need to do things slightly differently, therefore, which is they have to do. And I think the whole sustainability aspect has heightened. I think the big thing that Russell said earlier with the One Health aspect is very tangible. It's quite interesting, some of the data that you gave. Some of the higher things were to do with personal health and community health and those kind of aspects of sustainability, as in what people and the local community are going through in their sustainable way of, well, even in simple terms, existing. And I think businesses and clubs and sporting associations are very much more aware of that, whereas I think in the past it was very, very focused on climate, and the sustainability kind of voice has widened, and that means people can get involved in all kinds of different levels of it, which I think is hugely exciting, because it gives opportunity for people to realize that it is just a normal part of operating. If you're operating whatever scale of business or club or sporting association, doesn't matter what the scale is, sustainability is a normal aspect. And I think that has changed a lot. And I think you will see over the 2021 people becoming more and more determined just to do the right thing, because it is the right thing to do. And small steps, big steps, whatever, but just keep moving forward. The one final thing on this, I think, from what I've been hearing, is the big thing is really for us to be able to, BASIS and other organizations, to be able to help people deliver actions, support them, assist them, guide them, give them frameworks, give them data, give them advice, give them best practice, but just to enable places to develop their own actions and to start changing things within their environment.
Thanks, Pete. It's really helpful. Reflection, contribution, appreciated.
I know Phil's got his hand up. Sorry to interrupt, Dom. I just wanted to build on something that Pete said. Is we have mentioned the consultation. They were suggesting that financial support is needed, and yes, I certainly won't deny that in certain areas that's going to be useful. But in fact, for a lot of major venues in particular, being more sustainable isn't necessarily about spending more, because it's all within the functions that are already happening. You know, everybody has a catering contract, everybody has a cleaning contract, everybody has waste management contracts. The point is you ask the right questions at the right time, and you can make changes to that, and it should or will often fall within current budgets anyway. So yes, there might be issues around some kind of upfront funding that's required, but often it's not about the finances, it's about the knowledge, about the understanding, about the will to do something. And I think that's where we've got to build on the strengths of BASIS. And sorry for interrupting, I think Phil's got a question as well.
Yeah, good. Over to Phil, and then we'll come to the chat in the last few minutes.
So yeah, so I'm Phil Horton from the RYA, and I'm also on the BASIS management board now. So yeah, some of this has already been covered with the conversation you had with Peter, but thinking about the advice we could put out for organisations, for members, there's also a note in the chat there about the information that was provided about what Wimbledon have done, and I think there's probably an opportunity for BASIS to advise and provide maybe sample policy statements and things for organisations of different sizes, even right the way down to grassroots individual small clubs. I mean, one of the things we were talking about earlier was just the simple things, like most small clubs have a huge hot water demand at weekends. They have a particular use case that's different from most other organisations. If we can provide advice on the best way to do that in a sustainable way and some good case studies on it, then that would help a huge number of small organisations who are linked to BASIS through their national governing bodies and so on. And the other thing I wanted to just make a quick point about was the discussion we've been having about declaring a climate emergency, and just being aware that there is the Sports for Climate Action programme in place that's run by the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change that does have some clear targets behind it, and maybe we should tie ourselves into that so we get that kind of direct link into real targets. So if we declare a climate emergency, we can say, and here's what the proposal is, here's what we plan to do, rather than it just being words, which, as you say, is always a concern.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. And actually, I think that links to one of the points that was made slightly earlier in the chat by William Powell, talking about, like, I mean, I assume politicians in the UK, but actually I think it goes for the kind of the overall kind of diplomatic process around climate change that the UN runs, which, as we all know, the UK has got a leading role in over the next year. And actually, I think UK hosting COP26 gives us a really strong entry point as a sector to be able to have that conversation that William talks about getting the ear of politicians around the specific requirements around sustainability in British sport. And I think if we're ever going to have leadership as a sector, then this is the year, or next year is the year when we're going to realise that. And our task as BASIS is to best enable that. It's something, the specific question about national policy and politics is something that we've been talking about as a team for a little while. My day job is to run the parliamentary group for renewable and sustainable energy, and there's certainly a way in which we can link up those two things, and we're looking forward to finding a way to do that. But I think if you talk to Lord Deben and you hear from the Committee on Climate Change, they are fairly emphatic in that there are some government departments that are taking net zero and climate commitments really seriously, and there are some government departments that aren't quite there yet, and that the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport is one of the latter rather than the former. So we've got a job to do to get it high enough up the political agenda in sport, but actually we think that there is a way that we can do that and to have an impact. Just looking through the chat, there are a couple of practical things. Question around the recording around the Wimbledon presentation. That is on the website. In fact, almost all of the webinars that we ran during the summer are on the website. So it's, you know, there's hours and hours of absolutely fantastic sustainability content for you to go back to there. And I particularly do recommend the Wimbledon session, because I think in terms of the feedback that we had, it was resoundingly positive. Russ, you might have a couple of reflections on one or two of the things that are coming up in the chat. I'm going to hand back to you for any final reflections on this discussion before you close it.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Look, the contributions we had are useful, certainly useful, and we want to keep this open. It's got to be a discussion. We've done this consultation as a starting point. We've now got this data. We know where people are and where we actually want to move to. There is the political will, or appears to be the political will, moving forward. We've got COP26 next year. There are other global conferences that are happening around biodiversity, around waste management. All sorts of things are happening over the next year or so. So we're going to be hearing much more about this in the news. And our belief clearly is that sport needs to be, or should be, leading in this area, and has a huge opportunity to put out so many positive messages around sustainability and sport. So it's not just about cleaning up our own act and what we're doing. It's about putting information out there and just making this part of our normal behaviour. If there is a silver lining in amongst everything we've been through for the last 9 months or so, and possibly the next 3 to 6 months, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to change things. Lots more people have become so aware that we shouldn't really be going back to the way that things were, and really that ought to sit with sport as well. So we're going to make a big effort over the next quarter, and that is ambitious. I don't want to presuppose anything, but it's possible it will go beyond the summit, but something will happen at our summit in March and April where we're going to be focusing on this agenda. We're going to be focusing on how we move this forward. So please, I don't think it's up there quite yet, but certainly on the website soon, we'll be putting up expressions of interest for the summit in spring, late March, early April. And we want to have a really good cohesive conversation around this, progress this forward, engage with government, engage with policymakers, and come back in 3 to 4 months' time with a much more coherent view of how we push this forward. At the moment, it's our ideas, and by our, I mean BASIS and our management group, our management board. You guys are part of our community. You come along to our webinars, you listen to what we've been saying. We're grateful to you for that, but please have your say as well. You know, tell us what you think. Should we declare a climate emergency? How should we be setting targets? Does it need to be related to funding? Is that the way that we push people to do things? Should it be within licensing and how venues are actually run? How do we sort out risk analyses within sports for different venues? And then how do we implement awareness raising and training within sport? So if you've got a thought on any of those, or indeed if you think we've missed anything out, please get back to us. We expect something to be in the media between Christmas and New Year. Clearly we will put it out to our mailing list, so you will get access to the final report, to any media coverage that we do get. We're hopeful we'll get it. We believe we'll get it. It's that sort of interesting time for the media where they'll be looking for good news stories moving forward, and possibly sport. They won't have so many stories around sport, so they'll be looking for a sports story as well. And if it's a good news story, we'll get some coverage. But we'll make sure you see all of that. Unless anybody does want to make a final point, either from the BASIS Management Board or anybody else has suddenly thought of something, I will wrap up. We're coming up to 3 o'clock. Just want to wish you the best Christmas that you can have. It's an unusual year, clearly. It's been an odd year. We still don't know exactly what the rules and guidance from government are going to be. But look, have the best Christmas you can possibly have. BASIS is going to pick all this up in the new year. We want to engage with you guys. We want your input. So as much as you can communicate back to us, we'll keep communicating with you. And let's hope we'll have a good Christmas, a much better 2021, and let's get sustainability onto the agenda for sport in the UK, and make us world leading in our response to sustainability as well. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you in 2021.